Recorded. Welcome to everyone on this beautiful Easter Monday. This is Turning the Tide on Climate. Last week we talked about rewilding, and tonight we're talking about cities acting for climate justice. As you know, I'm Clark. You're familiar with me by now, and our co-host tonight will be Jude Larkin. So if you have any questions during and after the presentation that you want to ask our presenter, Jeremy Milloy, please go ahead and do that. There will be lots of time after the presentation for Jeremy to respond to your questions. The seminar is being recorded, and all of the links for those recordings are on the 350 Kingston website. Kingston is situated on traditional Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee territory, and we acknowledge, as always, that settler colonialism remains a problem today as it has in the past. It's my pleasure tonight to introduce to you Jeremy Milloy. He's someone who some of you may already know because he is one of the organizers of Just Recovery Kingston, which is trying to advise the city of Kingston on how to be both green and just in how the recovery takes place. He works for the Justice, Peace, and Integrity of Creation Office of the Sisters of Providence of St. Vincent de Paul. His position is Lead Integrity of Creation and Climate Change. He is currently part of campaigns to advance divestment from extractive capitalism, strengthen communities through mutual aid, and to win a Green New Deal, something that we've heard about in this series already. Welcome, Jeremy.
Thank you very much, Clark. Thank you, Jude, and thanks to everyone at 350 for hosting this space and doing these amazing seminars and presentations over the last several weeks, and for inviting me to be part of it. And happy Easter, everyone who celebrates. And also, thank you for opening with an acknowledgement of the ongoing cost and trauma of settler colonialism and colonial capitalism. Certainly super relevant because Indigenous communities are often, people on the front lines who are working to protect our water, protect land, protect air, protect the future. Currently, with the fight over the Enbridge pipeline going up through Minnesota, for example, Line 3. It's I think always worthy of people to think about how our climate action can be in solidarity with Indigenous communities who have already been doing the work. That was a great introduction. Thank you. Obviously, my hair was a lot shorter back then, but we've all had our own kind of different pandemic, and mine has involved not going to the barber for a year. I will just jump right in as has traditionally been happening on the Turning for Tide series. I'm going to speak for about 15 or 20 minutes about what some cities are doing on climate, what is possible, and kind of what some things to keep in mind are when pushing for climate justice at a local level and in a local framework. And then hopefully we'll have lots of time to discuss and have a back and forth that way. I am going to share my screen. Please just bear with me for 1 second. How's that? Can people see that okay?
Yeah, it looks good.
Okay, terrific. I actually am not going to go full screen. I like having the thing on the side to know where I'm going, so that will keep me posted. Climate action at the local level. We always think of climate as a global problem. Obviously, it's one of the reasons why it is such a seemingly intractable and kind of system changey type of problem, is because we think about it happening at not just the national level but at the international level, right? At things like the Paris conference or COP26 that's coming up, things that international governments agreements regulate, and governments have to make commitments. So it can sometimes think of, okay, what can we do at the city level? What do cities have to do that is actually going to be truly meaningful to deal with what is in fact a global problem, right? I mean, we often think that what Canada can do at the national level, which currently is not very much, but even if we were acting to our potential, we'd still be fall short. So what does a city matter, right? Well, um, I think that I'm gonna start us off here with a classic old saw of the environmental movement, which is still honestly super relevant, which is think globally, act locally. And you know, most of us as residents of a community have the most power and the most impact in our neighborhoods, in the lives of the people around us, and in the lives of the communities and cities in which we live. That's where we can be most effective. And that's basically the argument I'm going to make today, that if you want to be effective on climate, think about what you could be doing at the local level. And, you know, the local level includes most people on Earth. This was a big global shift that happened about 10 years ago. For the first time in the entire history of human existence on this planet, more of the world's population lived in cities than they did in rural areas. Which is a transition that took place in Canada about 100 years ago. It took place globally recently. So what cities do is actually going to be enormously important. And often, if you talk to politicians at the local level, they will tell you about all of the things that cities do not have control over compared to other levels of government. In Canada, the federal government, obviously, and the provincial government. However, most cities in Canada and around the world have power over some major climate relevant issues. And you know, even a survey of some of the major issues that are hot button around Kingston dinner tables are, you know, climate relevant. The issue of how tall buildings are going to be downtown and what they're going to be made of and how many parking spaces they have and how many people are going to live there are all enormously relevant to thinking about what type of future we're going to have and how climate sustainable it's going to be. So cities have power over lots of stuff that matters for climate. To name a few: buildings, local transportation, local roadways, parks and trees, and water and wastewater. And if we look globally, we can find it's cities, not necessarily federal or national level or state or provincial level governments, that are doing some of the most interesting, important, and innovative things on climate action. So just to run down a few examples, the city of Barcelona in Spain created a superblocks model that sought to push vehicle traffic, like fossil fuel vehicle traffic, mostly to the outside, and then inside neighborhoods create mostly pedestrian priority and bicycle priority corridors, sort of like a quiet streets model on a large scale around the city. This allows for, and this is a theme that I'm going to be coming back for, an increased reliance on non-polluting methods of transportation, and also reshaping the built environment in a way that is more hospitable for people and families, and less hospitable for, cars traveling at high rates of speed and injuring and killing pedestrians and cyclists. Speaking of which, one of the most contentious pedestrian versus driver cities in Canada anyways is Toronto, which I well remember from I lived there. Toronto created a King Street transit corridor where, again, they chose to give priority on the streets to people, not to cars, and created a transit corridor in which streetcars were running much more frequently and had much more of the roadway, because they were carrying much more people than, largely single-use vehicles. This basically reduced emissions 30 to 40% at rush hour. It resulted in hugely expanded transportation volumes on the corridor, and it was all done for $1.5 million or less, which in a city the size of Toronto is very little for a major change. The city of Olympia, which is not a big place, has pioneered free public transit. And again, this is, as we see a person here who's using public transit and also a wheelchair, this is not just a climate issue, to again come back to my theme about the relationship between climate action and justice. it is a right to mobility action. It is a disability justice action, that everyone in a city has the right to safe, dignified, affordable mobility. In Los Angeles, similarly, the Community Solar Project has the city investing in putting solar panels on lower income neighborhoods, and then allowing or encouraging tenants to buy their lower cost power from the grid created in the neighborhood. So recognizing the fact that right now, most of the people who put up solar panels are the people with the disposable income to make that investment, the city is again investing in justice and investing in the future at the same time, making sure that lower income neighborhoods are part of LA's solar grid and allowing tenants, not just homeowners, to benefit from lower hydro prices. City of Toronto, in what is going to be a harbinger of what is happening cross country, has a Better Buildings partnership that encourages retrofits for buildings throughout the city. Cape Town, by necessity, which is something unfortunately we are going to be seeing more of as climate action bites down, change bites down harder on our daily lives, has had to be very innovative in terms of wastewater management and water conservation, including encouraging citizens across the city to find new ways to use less water because they were facing a major water crisis, which they largely successfully averted through mobilizing the community and promoting conservation issues. You recently had Joyce Hostin in. I saw people talking about her in the chat to discuss tiny forests or little forests. These are happening in Europe. These are happening in Japan. Of course, these are happening right here in our region as a way to promote local recreation, local communion with nature, and something that we can do right away that within 10 years is going to promote biodiversity and also climate mitigation and some sequestration. Perhaps the most ambitious thing that is happening nationally at the city level is Vancouver's recent $500 million investment in what they call a climate emergency action plan. And there's a lot in this plan, but some highlights are that by 2030, they envision 90% of residents living within an easy walk or roll of all their daily needs, including going to work, recreation, going to the gym, getting their groceries, picking their kids up from childcare, etc. They envision 2 to 3 trips being walk, cycling, or transit on city roadways, and 50% of carbon pollution being cut from existing buildings from 2007 levels. They're even changing the building code in order to make sure that new construction is being done in a far more climate sustainable and climate aware way than current construction. Now, there's some more details about it here. They also, I think, importantly, are building this into the budget process and include consistent reporting of how they are doing with their targets. Something that we have yet to see at the federal level, where our current accountability framework, most groups believe falls far short of what is actually necessary to keep Canada on track to meet its targets, which we have never yet done as a nation. Okay, so I just want to take a deep breath for now. I just ran down quite a lot of things there. But I hope I have proven 2 points. Number one, that cities are doing ambitious, far-reaching climate initiatives at the local level without necessarily having to wait for higher levels of government to push things along. And number two, cities are capable of acting on climate in a way that is not just advancing climate action, but is advancing climate justice, i.e. repairing some of the inequities of society that have led us to climate catastrophe in the first place, dealing with things like poverty, housing affordability, and justice for renters. So now I want to take us in a different direction and consider, how does one advance climate action at the city level? And I assume that none of you are the mayor, so I am going to have us speak here as community members, as people who are active and who care about our city and care about our city doing things right in terms of climate and also advancing justice in our city. So I'm going to offer some observations on what I see that has worked at the local level to make policies like this happen. Number one is to be specific. There are a number of possible ways that one can act on climate, right? And the multiplicity of angles on the climate crisis and climate action that this 350 series has shown both in the winter and spring sessions, I think is a really rich understanding of it. And that's always the flip side of climate. There's so many things one can do, which can be daunting, but the good thing is there are so many things that we can do, in that everybody can find a spot and a niche. But no matter what you do to try and push things forward at the local level, you should choose something, be specific, and choose one or two straightforward goals, and be prepared to push them through. Say be open. Local political action depends on building coalitions. For example, one of the reasons that climate justice policies are so necessary and so successful are not just because they're the right thing to do, not just because they will actually improve our lives as well as addressing this existential challenge of climate change, but also because they politically work. There are a lot more people that are down for climate action that also addresses our housing problems, that also addresses care for seniors, and things of that nature than there are people who just want to do climate work for climate's sake. So be open. And if you are thinking about retrofits, think of partnering, for example, with housing advocates who want to make sure that seniors living in low income housing stay warm in the winter and stay cool in the summer. Be patient. This is a tough one. This is one I struggle with all the time in my role with the JPIC office of the Sisters of Providence, because on the one hand, one thing that we actually have very little of in the climate crisis is time. We all know this. However, making change is not an overnight process. And one has to be prepared. A lot of the things that have happened that I've highlighted successes here have been because people and groups have been willing to see things through over the long haul. Be strategic. If you're looking to make change at the local level, think about who are your possible allies? Who are your possible obstacles or enemies? How does change happen at the local level? Who are the counselors that you might work with to advance it? Who are the staff members in a city of this size that you need to know and need to know their work to help get the right audience, have the right ask, have the right solution for their perceived problems? A group whose work I want to highlight would be Wellington X. Some people here who might have worked on that campaign. Wellington X was a group of community advocates, people who are concerned with nature, people who are concerned with housing affordability, people who are concerned with quality of life in the Inner Harbor neighborhood where I live. And they spent years working very painstakingly through the city strategic plan process, through public consultation processes, through canvassing, through connecting neighbors in fun activities, but also in less fun activities like going to community consultations, through advocacy at the local level with decision makers, and spent years fighting a road that would have destroyed a lot of green space, and obviously invested more heavily in CO2 producing infrastructure. And they did it through building these connections, being strategic, taking time, and being specific about what they were trying to accomplish. And I would argue it's one of those public health things where, if a public health measure is successful, it's very hard to credit it because it's mostly about what doesn't happen, right? Fewer infections, fewer deaths, etc. Again, the Wellington Street Extension victory, I think, is one of the most significant local climate victories. And it's possible that people forget because what is there is what didn't happen, right? The road that was not built. But however, somebody who went for a beautiful walk down that way with my wife and my dog today, also, the birds that are still there, the turtles that are still there, the trees that are still there, the trail that is still usable by community people. All of those are tangible victories for our environment locally. So far, be strategic, be patient, be open, be specific, be partners. I think sometimes at local level, change makers can often look at a city as adversaries, or local decision makers or local landholders, uh, anybody in the local power space as necessarily an adversary. And I'm definitely, that certainly is not always the case. I think a really good example of local community groups who are doing important work on CO2 mitigation and adaptation would be KCAT, right? Kingston Coalition for Active Transportation, who through years of developing expertise and community engagement on the active transit file were able during COVID-19 and during the shutdowns last summer to partner with the city to pioneer a Quiet Streets program. This is really important, not only in terms of improving our quality of life and giving streets back to people and taking them away from CO2 production and car traffic, but also a way that the city could partner with local people who had expertise based on their lived experience and based on the work they had been doing for years. So this was a partnership that I think has a lot of potential, and hopefully the kind of thing that can be drawn on as an example to make change in the future. However, I'm going to completely do a 180 and say, yes, there is also a time at the local level and at the political level to be disruptive, right? And we saw, for example, in the Black Lives Matter protests across North America, that when people, reached the end of the road in terms of working within the system, people decided to disrupt business as usual because business as usual was leading to death. And in the climate movement, disruption has also worked. The sit-in here at Nancy Pelosi's office and the targeting of Democrats who were in the pocket of the fossil fuel industry by youth-led activists in the Sunrise Movement has led directly to the Sunrise Movement and Bernie Sanders being part of Biden's Climate Commission, and has led to the fact that in its early days, the US administration under Joe Biden is doing far more quickly on climate than the supposed climate leaders currently leading our government at the federal level. Finally, I encourage everyone to tell a new story. Under COVID, there's been a push to get back to normal, and then there has been a counter push to say, well, obviously we can't get back to normal. That wasn't working, which I wholeheartedly agree with. So the question is, what is the new story that we're going to tell, right? And the example I love from the British environmentalist and writer, many of you probably read George Monbiot in his book Out of the Wreckage. He tells a beautiful story right at the start that the belief on a species level that what sets humans apart is competition and predation is nonsense. All kinds of other species do that, and they do it more effectively than humans do. What really makes us special is our ability to help each other, our ability to cooperate to accomplish complex tasks, our ability to be altruistic, our ability to put off satisfaction today for a broader future. And it's those qualities that we're going to need, not the social Darwinist, kill or be killed qualities that will serve us in the future. So I encourage, storytelling needs to be a big part of whatever change you're trying to make at the local level. And Joyce and Maureen and the work they're doing with Little Forests locally, again, I think is a really important one, because they're telling a story not just of Indigenous resurgence and reconciliation, and not just a story, not that that is a just, but a story that includes those things, includes an environmental recovery framework, but also tells a story about a beautiful way of life and supporting biodiversity and a place that we could go within the city and go to another place, right? And be part of building and growing and caring for a forest. So in whatever change you're trying to make, it's really important to tell stories of how that would make our city better, how that would change the lives of people in the city, how it would change your life. And that's the kind of thing that we are trying to do in Just Recovery Kingston, as Clark was kind enough to mention off the top. We do have a website coming soon. Right now, though, the Facebook group is growing every week. And Just Recovery Kingston exists to say, how do we recover in a way that tells a new story? How do we create a city out of this moment that takes care of its land, air, and water, and also the people who live in it? And currently, Just Recovery members are pursuing two major campaigns this year. One is to expand free transit in the city, and the second is to expand access to community gardens and to make the process easier to get a community garden no matter what neighborhood you live in, and get it more quickly and have more support for the program. to see the program as a climate justice initiative, as well as recreation. Before we move into the discussion period, I want to highlight a couple other things. Kingston is making moves to do climate action locally, right? Kingston has ambitious goals and ambitious targets. Climate action is part of Kingston's strategic plan. So one thing that everyone can do at the local level is hold politicians accountable to that, to contact council and the mayor regularly and say that, they were elected to do climate action, they have committed to do climate action, and as a resident and as a voter, that's something that you expect to be followed through on. It's something that you support. Because that's an important message for them to hear. One of the other things about cities being smaller is that there's a less amount of voters in every election, which means your communications with your elected representatives at the local level matter far more than they do at the provincial or federal level. So just a quick look at the city's current targets here to get to net zero by 2040. And again, I just wanted to plug a few things on the way out here. Obviously, the GoFundMe for the Little Forest Initiative. Definitely encourage you to donate if you can. There is going to be a local bank action, which hopefully, Clark and Jude, if you're willing to share it with the mailing list. Because of the current lockdowns, we are in the process of transitioning this from something that did have an exciting, creative, in-person component to something that is probably going to be a virtual action, encouraging you to either visit or more likely call or email your branch saying that Canadian banks are the biggest funders of fossil fuels worldwide. We want you to invest in a just transition and green energy. So I will send out some more details for how to participate in that. Another thing that's happening locally for Earth Day, April 24th, I'm working with Rotary Club on a Great Lakes watershed cleanup. This will be a socially distanced event that you can participate in a variety of locations, not just in Kingston, but this one goes all the way from Napanee to, I believe, Brockville, caring for our waterfront. And if you want to get involved, you can email kingstoncleanup@gmail.com. And I just want to highlight this as a last thing. The more that things like this are happening, things like I've described, things like the climate series that 350 Kingston has been bringing every week, and all of the other actions that 350 leads, including climate strikes and other different protests and events. The more our city is active on climate, the more the decision makers in the city realize that is the kind of community we are, and that is the kind of future we want. If you want to stay informed on basically everything that is happening locally in terms of opportunities to participate in climate action, you can join the Kingston Climate Action list. I'll probably put the link in the chat. It's kcal.substack.com, but that's it's pretty small there. That is a once a week email that I send out with usually 1 or 2 things that you can do that week if you want to take a climate action. So in conclusion, cities can lead on climate action. Cities are leading on climate action. They're doing so in a way that not just addresses the climate crisis, but also makes things better for the people that live there, that improves the quality of life, that addresses inequity, that makes housing better. And we can do it here. We just have to be strategic, be patient, be creative, and be bold. So let's turn over the questions and answers. If you have thoughts or ideas or that you would like to share later on, there's my email, and I welcome hearing from you anytime. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. That's great. That's great and inspiring. Lots of really good ideas there. I'm just going to ask you. You have been working with Just Recovery Kingston, and there's been a huge amount of talk about what things the city can do right now. What are some doable things? I guess my question to you is, if you were in charge of Kingston right at the moment, if you were the mayor or whatever, what are 3 things that you would do right away to help to deal with the climate crisis?
Okay. Three things I would do right away. Well, I would look at what could we do to get people using transit again, and get people back into transit, feeling safe about using transit. And I think that that would include some form of lower cost or free transit for a greater number of people in our city. And I get the sense that yes, we are in an economic crunch locally, but on the other hand, we are already pioneering fare-free transit right now, right? Because transit is so reduced because of the pandemic. I would look at this period as a way to invest in increasing ridership after COVID, and whether that was a 1 day a week, or trying to make the access bus zero cost, or trying to make it zero cost for our older people or for essential workers, some type of initiative to invest in transit now and grow ridership out of the pandemic. Second thing I think I would do would be kind of a check in on. We have goals and we have check-ins on them. I would like to try to engage the city, and by the city I mean not just staff but the community, in thinking about how much can we cut emissions as a city over the next 12 to 24 months. And because I think that moving up the deadline, it's a sense of urgency that is needed, and it would encourage people to be bold and creative in doing things that are not already on the table. And also, in doing so, try to make sure that every aspect of our community, and that includes the most major emitters, like for example in Vista, were engaged with the city process and engaged with residents in terms of what they were doing to reduce their footprint. The third thing I would do, I would look at what is possible. I would be as creative as possible, looking at what is possible in terms of what we have available to us in the building code, to prioritize future builds that actually improve density, do not build onto green sprawl, and use have less car storage in them, are built with greener materials. Like, what can we be doing in the code at the local level, not just to incentivize that, but to make that happen? I'm sure some of you are familiar with Seth Klein's book, The Good War, and he kind of says in the book that you can tell when a government is serious when they go from suggesting people should do something to making it happen. And it might not be possible, but I would have a serious think about what are all the things that we could do with bylaws, with the local building code, with the city's control over parking, to really actually push some of these things forward in terms of having more active transportation, having less space for cars, having greener buildings being built and retrofitted.
Great. That's really good answer. Um, I'm going to now pass it over to Jude. Are you unmuted now?
Yes, I am.
Okay, good. So why don't you take over here?
Okay, I'm going to read the first question from the chat window. And it is, are there success stories to tell of climate change action taken by small municipalities, 5,000 to 10,000 people?
But before we can I just get it here for Jeremy, if you could stop sharing your screen, we'd be able to see you better.
For sure.
Okay.
How's that, everyone?
Yeah, that looks good.
Terrific. I mean, probably. I have to say that I don't know. My focus at the municipal level has been on cities that are larger than 5 to 10,000, cities that are the size of Kingston, basically, because here is where I've kind of decided to devote my work. But I mean, I think even if we look at, like, Loyalist Township has a climate action plan, and I do not know, I'm sure the population of Loyalist is greater than 5,000, but it is a smaller municipal area than Kingston, and it has goals, it has addressed things, it has engaged, it is in the process of engaging citizens on what climate action possibilities are there. So I would say that there are opportunities for municipalities of that size to do it. Municipalities of that size are very often accomplished, as someone who spent a lot of time in smaller towns, in community-oriented action, in creating things, for example, I could see a quiet streets program working really well in a town of that size, and using that maybe to attract tourism. A city where you have to leave your car outside or at home, and you have a kind of more of a European experience where you're exploring all the local shops and stuff on foot or on bicycle, because they're close to car traffic. Something like that I think could work wonderfully well in a city of that size.
Oh, thank you. And what are the higher order concerns we should be lobbying the city for this summer that, in your opinion, could make Kingston a leader in municipal climate action by this fall, in addition to public transit and community gardens?
Okay. Yeah. I think the building one I pointed out is a big one. Are we doing are we using every tool we have at our disposal? Because that is both a higher order one in that it speaks to, where the plurality of our emissions come from, which is in the building sector, and it's not asking, to create new offices or create or spend new money. It's actually just asking to look, what do we actually have available right now on the books to direct development in a more stable way. I would also look at, again, what can the city be doing using its bully pulpit to bring more businesses to the table. Investa being the one that I can think of the most, but other businesses. When you go to the climate symposium, right now there's often a focus on what other municipalities are doing, and I think the symposium is, we do highlight some local people, which is important. I think it would be important for us to hear, and this is a discussion that I've had with Jude and Gavin before, so I hope you don't mind me sharing, because I think it's such a wonderful idea. I think it was Gavin's initially, that it would be a really interesting opportunity if we could schedule some kind of thing where we're hearing from major emitters locally, the base, Queens, SLC, the city, to say, how has it gone over the past year? Where could we be making gains next year? And so think of things as not as just something down the road, but thinking of cutting emissions at the institutional level as something that we're all engaged in right now. I think would be two things that the city could do over the summer and fall that don't require massive new outlays of staff time or money, but that also would definitely kind of continue to build on the goals the city has already set.
Oh, so are you saying change the city plan, like the zoning, as well as changing the building code?
Yeah, seeing what's possible, exactly, in terms of building code, in terms of zoning, in terms of parking. What are the possibilities that the city has to make sure that new builds are as green as possible, to make sure that they're like, how much space for parking spaces do we need in new buildings, for example, for single-use car spots, when we could be building, as has been proven with the capital settlement, it appears to be a lower building that has therefore a lower carbon footprint, but the same amount of units, which was accomplished in large part by reducing parking spaces. The city has jurisdiction over parking. What else could we be doing? Is it possible, the building code in Vancouver, they're using it to incentivize green construction. Could we be doing that here? Could we be doing it to incentivize improving rental housing, and encouraging landlords to invest in improving the quality of their homes? Nick Lorway and his partner, whose name escapes me right now, Home Standards Project, is doing amazing work in covering how much rental housing in our city falls below standard. And bringing that up to standard is something that should be done by law, but it's also something that could, if done properly, reduce emissions, reduce heating costs in those homes. So thus improving the standard of living for renters, improving Kingston's legal requirements in housing, and also reducing the emissions and reducing the energy needed to heat those homes. So yeah, just a real look at what we have available in terms of what power we have and what bylaws are available to try and move things forward as fast as possible.
This next question is, how do you feel about Uber buses at night? I'm not quite sure what an Uber bus is.
Yeah, A book I've been reading lately is that I'd recommend is called Do Androids Dream of Electric Cars by James Will. And he's a Canadian transit activist. And I've been reading him to get, educated and working in just recovery and working on the transit file. And I would say, on the one hand, I think that there should be more buses. I think that that would be awesome. Um, However, I don't want Uber to do it because I also have a previous a life that I can continue as also a workplace and labor activist and labor historian, and I've read quite a lot about the treatment of workers by Uber, and I don't think it's worthwhile. I believe a just transition means good jobs in the lower carbon sector, and to me that means good transit jobs. So that's one part of it. Also, I would rather that we own it. That we provide transit as a public service because everybody has a right to be mobile rather than, we have built the infrastructure that Uber can operate on. We have built these roads. We have built the stoplights. We have built the stop signs. I don't think that we should necessarily give that away to a private company to exploit. However, the idea of what can the city be doing to incentivize, a greater public transit or just even creating different routes with lower fares. I hear somebody talking about Peterborough in the chat, which I'm excited to hear about because that's my hometown. I think the city should be looking into that for sure. And I think we should be very creative in terms of transit right now, while also respecting that the people at Kingston Transit are working on a very difficult situation. So it should be, what can we be giving in terms of additional support?
Mhm. Are green roofs an option in Kingston?
Yes, they are. And it's something I would like to see expanded upon more. And I know, you got to meet with Kyla Tianahara a few weeks back, and I know that some of Kyla's students, like I'm working with some of them who are doing different pitches about environmental initiatives locally. And I know one of the other groups that I'm not working with is doing a green roofs initiative. I think it's possible here. I think it's one of those things that, when we were talking earlier, Jude, about what are some things that could be happening, right away. That seems to me to be something that doesn't need a huge kind of ramp up to make happen. So I think that should be looked at for sure.
What are your thoughts about the energy retrofit program being offered by the Federation of Canadian Municipalities?
I mean, it needs to happen. I don't know 100% of the details yet of what it's going to look like. I know a little bit. The main area that I see, however, is that I'd like to see it expanded to is it's very focused right now on single family homes, and I would really like to see that focused on investing in how do we get larger buildings retrofitted as quickly as possible, because we do need to do things that meaningfully reduce emissions and keep us on a path to zero, like right now, which is why, although green roofs are amazing and a cool idea, something like retrofits, I would say, is a higher priority because it will promise to reduce more emissions now and for the foreseeable future. And in that way, the most efficient way to use retrofits to do it is investing in retrofitting apartment buildings. And so I would like to see some kind of expansion of this program to make sure that more of those are covered. And it's going to be interesting to see, how do we do housing retrofits in a way that advances housing justice, right? Housing is a major issue locally here. And it would be interesting to see whatever we can do to make it so that people's housing is more dignified and more comfortable, as well as more climate friendly. And what does that mean in terms of what kind of knowledge people are going to have, what kind of money people are going to have to put down up front? I think those are going to be important questions.
Last week, 400 plus people attended Ottawa's Donut Economics webinar. How is climate change linked to the economy? Should we exploit such linkages and explore a Kingston donut?
Yeah, I think that would be a great idea. I mean, everybody in the JPIC office has been reading a Donut Economics book over the past year by Kate Raworth. I think there are ideas in the book that are, there are a lot of them are very old ideas, and people who were caring for this land and this water before European settlers arrived, I think kind of had more of a donut perspective than industrial capitalism does. The decisions are made in terms of how does it maintain a balance with the ecology, right? And so yes, we definitely need a new story, and a donut can be part of that story. And for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's about donut economics believes that is a hole in the middle that people shouldn't fall into in terms of not having enough political rights, not having enough funds to live, not having enough education. And then there's an external that we should not move beyond. We should not push past the carrying capacity of our planet. Where we want to be is the donut in between those two spaces. And I think that would be a worthwhile way to look at things in our city, because one of the things that I find is a real opportunity of living in this moment in terms of telling new stories is we can't say that things work. Like, we cannot say that what we have been doing as a human society is working. I think COVID has shown that, climate change has shown that, 2 economic collapses in the last 15 years has shown that. There's not a great argument for the way that we've always done things, which is basically to try to, stimulate economic growth primarily by private wealth, right? That's basically been the plan. And so it's a rich time to look at other ways that humans have lived and thrived in on this planet for thousands of years. And I think, going back to a story that's just like looking very specifically at our city's future, Just Recovery Kingston exists, kind of in that donut model, because we didn't want the story just to be, well, growth. We just need, we need smart growth, or we need growth. We need to incentivize the people who have a great amount of money and property to create jobs. We are looking to, again, say, how do you take care of the city and also the people and also the environment, which is, basically in line with the principles of donut economics. I think it'll be interesting to see, because the city of Amsterdam has adopted a donut framework for their recovery. Does that lead to different decision making? Does that lead to meaningful consultation with the community? Does it lead to more democracy? Does it lead to cutting emissions and protecting the environment? I think the example of Amsterdam is going to be very interesting over the next few years for that.
So yeah, something to watch. Okay, next question is lower transit fare for non-peak times. Would this work in Kingston?
I mean, honestly, I don't know. I don't know enough about the transit system yet to have a good, useful answer. I will say that one of the things that we're doing in Just Recovery, in terms of the transit working group is doing, is we're finalizing a survey for everybody in the city, whether you use transit or not, focused around barriers to use. Basically, what is stopping you from using transit more often? That could be cost. That could be, as you say, off peak, like it could be what times transit is available. It could be what routes transit's available. It could be accessibility. It could be safety. It could be convenience. And that's basically going to inform us about the best way to expand good transit in this city. How do we do that? And so it's very possible that some people would say, like I would use transit a lot more if it was cheaper. From 11 till 4, because that's when I need it. That's definitely possible. And if that's something that's worked in other municipalities, please drop me a line, because I'm just trying to soak up a lot of different knowledge on transit right now.
All right, thank you. For that question. Perhaps smaller and electric collector buses in neighborhoods. This person says, most buses passing my home are essentially empty.
Yeah, I mean, right now that's a struggle, because as I said during the presentation, we are or earlier in the Q&A, we are kind of pioneering fare-free transit right now. I mean, a lot of people are not taking transit. More people are working from home, which is, again, I think something that the city should encourage employers, and already is, actually, to give the city its due credit, to keep people working from home if possible. also the workers' rights advocate is that we need to have some good kind of controls both in law and at the cultural level to make sure that people aren't working 24/7. But so that being said, again, that's an idea that might help, but the question is, we need to have a better idea of what people are using transit for, or what people would want to use transit for. Is it trips within the neighborhood, or is it larger trips across town? I mean, if it's the latter, collector buses would be less effective. So I think we just need more kind of information on the transit system. But again, if we are approaching the transit system from the perspective of a right to mobility and of reducing our emissions locally, and I think the kind of questions we're going to ask will take us in the right direction.
Is Queens still using Lake Ontario water for heating and cooling? And is that an option for other properties?
I don't know if Queens still is doing it. I know that, there are facilities and buildings in the ICI sector in Toronto that do it. I am not an engineer, so I do not want to say anything that is beyond my limited knowledge, but that people use that for district heating and district cooling in Toronto. And, I think that would be a good question to ask Utilities Kingston, whether that is something that could be expanded here for sure. Again, that is something that we have as that we are, sitting beside. So yeah, I do not have a great answer on that one.
Yeah, I remember from somebody asking that a couple of years ago, and the answer I remember was that for the Toronto's district heating and cooling, they had to have the water intake pipe in quite deep water, and that we don't have deep water that close to us.
Right.
But I don't know any of the details, and I don't know if that is an unsurmountable obstacle. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah. How exactly do community gardens mitigate climate change?
Yeah, good question. So community gardens are obviously, there is no silver bullet solution, but there are a few things. Basically, in Just Recovery Kingston, we are trying to expand the vision of community gardens from a recreation mindset to a food sovereignty mindset. And so we basically want to be expanding our ability to create urban agriculture, which thus takes a lot of carbon out of the food supply. It also addresses food poverty in the region. So our food is coming to us from a lot less of a ways away. Number two, more local food production in the city makes us more resilient in terms of future adaptation to climate change or future pandemics. Anything that can shut down a food supply. I think we learned from COVID that having an economy built on things on long, just in time, heavily carbon dependent supply chains is not ideal for the planet or for resilience. So those are basically the two major ones in terms of climate. There are also other, environmental benefits in terms of people spending time in nature, in terms of, supporting biodiversity, in terms of, reducing the amount of chemicals used in the food stream, etc. But yeah, it's not the be all end all in terms of climate justice, but I think there is an important climate justice as well as food justice aspect to it. And again, I think it's about telling a new story. I think it's about thinking about a way to live in the city. And this is one of the reasons why I love the Little Forest Project so much. That is about being connected to the land and the air and the water in the place that you live in. And that nature is not something that you have to go to Algonquin Park to be in connection with. And that you can have meaningful recreation and meaningful connections in your community that you don't have to go to the mall to buy. Right. I think it's just about thinking about creating a way of life and pioneering a way of life in Kingston that is better for the environment, not built on materialism and overconsumption, and connects us with each other and our community in a meaningful way. I think that there's often an inaccurate stereotype of people who are concerned about climate and the environment that it's about having less, it's about doing less, it's about having less fun. And I think things like the Community Gardens Initiative and a lot of the things in in mutual aid groups that I'm part of, kind of show is that you can do things that are better for the planet and take care of, the ecosystem and each other, that are also more satisfying ways to live. The key is, how do we expand that to make it more possible for other people to have those choices?
I agree. Climate action can be a lot of fun.
Exactly.
Solar panels on flat institutional and industrial sites seems like a win-win, as the electricity would be generated where it is used to some extent. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. And that didn't come up in the three things I do, but if I can have four things, one of the things I would look at would be, where could we be putting these? I would love to see something akin to the community solar plan. I'm not sure if Bob is here now, Bob McInnes, but he's talked to me about how brilliant it would be to explore putting panels on the Memorial Center. And then what if those panels could be managed by, an association in Kings Court, and that hydro used to provide low cost power that is green energy for that community. So I would love to see Utilities Kingston in the city, and again, that's a big asset that we have Utilities Kingston here, explore ways to kind of expand community solar and expand our solar grid throughout the city for sure. I think that would be something really important that we could do, and that we could do relatively quickly. And that also has an opportunity, again, to create kind of a different life that people can see that a green transition creates a better life that's more affordable, but also has a possibility of creating some good local jobs as well.
And how close is new home construction to net zero?
I think that depends on I think that depends on how you build it. I definitely. And again, I think that's where Vancouver has done that is interesting, is they have quite a lot of things in the bylaws, and that they've changed the building code. And I'm not sure how they were able to change the code. I don't know if it works differently in BC. Obviously, our code is provincial. But it would be interesting, again, to see bylaw here. What could we be doing to make sure that new construction is net zero or as regenerative as possible? I think that would be an important thing to see. And again, I think it would also be important to see that what can we be doing that to build density, and build density in a meaningful way. This is the real hard circle to square locally. I'm sure everybody is aware of the fact that we have an affordability crisis, and we have a need to create greener housing. The problem is the private sector has not shown much of a willingness to build greener stuff, although some people do. And the private sector has shown almost zero desire over the past 40 years to build any affordable or rent geared to income housing. So, I mean, who builds that and how, right? Or how do we repurpose existing buildings that we have in order to expand affordable housing in Kingston? Those kinds of things need to be on the table, I think, before we look at incentivizing new builds.
Okay, there's a couple more questions here. Some jurisdictions are not allowing connections to natural gas after sometime in the 2020s for new home builds. And what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's definitely worth exploring.
Yeah, if we could do it on the city level.
Yep, absolutely,
Yeah.
we should explore that. And then again, that would require partnerships and cooperation. I think that would require bringing in, major builders locally. It would require bringing in Utilities Kingston to think about how this is going to be powered. But I mean, I think it's a worthwhile conversation that we should be having.
Could the city require developers to build to a particular environmental standard?
I mean, yeah, because they already do to an extent, right? I mean, there's certain things that developers can and cannot build. And one of the things I would like to see explored in terms of what we already have available to us as a municipality would be how much further could we take that in terms of making, not just incentivizing, not just hoping, but because we are in a limited amount of time and the city has ambitious goals. The city has set those goals, and I think that people who want to build in the city should respect the city's goals. To think about what can be done to push that forward. Again, I keep coming back to parking. Is there a way the city can say, there should be so many spots for parking, but you shouldn't be building more than that, because we don't want you to be building car storage. We don't want to build more car infrastructure. What are other things that the city could be doing in terms of regulating materials? Or quite simply saying, hey, yeah, there's a process. We all know it takes a long time to get something built. One of the things I was hoping to see in the city's density by design process is saying that why aren't things that are net zero or regenerative in their builds and in their materials? Why can't we just say we can't make you, but that's the first thing that's going to be approved, and everybody else can go to the back of the line? I mean, I don't see why we can't do that. Things like that. And that might not be a requirement, but that's actually an extremely strong incentive. And so I do think that we already do, to an extent, require them to build to an environmental standard. And I don't see why the city can't explore how they could be incentivizing or requiring an even better one.
Clark, do we have time for one more question?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. Do you see potential for expanding access to a car sharing service in Kingston beyond what we currently have, perhaps even city owned or sponsored?
Now, I'm going to assume we're talking about something that would be used within the city. When I was going to university, there was something called Allostop, which was like a extremely bare bones ride sharing service where people would sign up, and it was like bulletin boards and stuff because it was pre-internet, and we would figure that out to get rides from Toronto to Montreal to wherever, right? And that was a ride sharing service where people would do that. The big issue here is liability, I think, for the city, but there's also no reason that everything has to go through a municipal level thing. And one of the great things about working with Mutual Aid Cataraqui Kingston is the amount of things that we figure out we can provide for ourselves and provide for each other. And an example, it's not car sharing, but it's similar in terms of sharing resources, is there's also a gardens group in Mutual Aid, and the things they've been doing, they're doing it again this year. So if you're interested, go on the Mutual Aid Cataraqui Kingston website. Our gardens network there works in that we share. So people who, let's say you have a backyard and so you have space to garden, but you don't want to use it, you don't like gardening, whatever, you can say somebody else, you can share that space, and then somebody who wants to garden but doesn't have access to space can sign up and be paired with your land. And then usually there's some sharing of what gets grown, and also what gets grown gets donated to the really free veggie markets. I can put it in the link. But yeah, so that is an example. I don't see why we couldn't think of something of a car sharing service that could work along similar lines. The real big question would be insurance, right? That's the biggest one I see. But there is. I believe it's a well-known kind of urbanist, writes for the New York Times, who recently said, in 20 to 30 years, and this could be totally bunk, urbanists and stuff like to make predictions of the way the future is going to look, and they're often wrong, but it was an interesting one that was within 20 or 30 years, for people who live in cities, the idea of private car ownership is going to become very quaint and anachronistic. And that you'll have access to cars for when you really need a car, but the idea that you have a car that you're maintaining and depreciating and paying insurance on, and taking into the shop 3 times a year, et cetera, is going to go the way of the dodo. And that's possible. It's also possible it's not, but it's also interesting to think about, for sure. And what some possibilities are. So I think that's a really great question to start thinking of. How can we have a car for when we need one, but not need to have a car?
Do you mind describing Mutual Aid Cataraqui for those of us that haven't heard of it before?
Sure. So Mutual Aid Cataraqui Kingston is a group that formed after the pandemic. And it was, certainly their mutual aid has all kinds of different roots. We had a webinar, Mutual Aid as Indigenous Practice, last week, but at its core, there's mutual aid organizations all over the world, and they're just regular people coming together to try to take care of each other and meet needs outside of, government or the marketplace. place, basically. So instead of getting the government to provide it for you, or instead of paying someone to provide it for you, we try to figure out how we can do the things we need ourselves. And so in terms of COVID, that has meant there's the garden sharing network I just mentioned. We were running grocery deliveries for several months to help out people who were isolating and couldn't get to the grocery store, but obviously needed food during the middle of lockdowns. We were running a check-in service where people were getting texts or phone calls to make sure that they weren't getting too isolated. We had free veggie markets. We've had, I'm very active in the Tenant Solidarity subgroup that works with renters who are having issues of evictions or unsafety during apartments or disputes with landlords, during the pandemic. So it's just basically, it's a free organization. People just join and agree to work with each other and try to take care of these kinds of needs that crop up. And it's democratic in terms of its decision making. And does that give a decent flavor of what it's all about?
Yeah, that's really intriguing. So resilient and cooperative. That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's been a really amazing experience working with people in it. So definitely, if people want to know more, there's the website. If you Google Mutual Aid Cataraqui Kingston, there's a website, there's a Facebook group, or people can send me an email.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Jeremy. That was very inspiring. And thanks to all our participants for their diverse questions.
If I can, before I go, just the last thing I want to do is put a link to the climate action list. It's a really good way to kind of stay kind of informed about some of the different things that are happening around town, and some of the things that I've been mentioning. So I'll pop that into the chat. And as I said, I'll put my email in there one more time. I am extremely fortunate that the sisters, have entrusted me to work as part of the JPIC office and work on environmental and climate justice issues full time. So that means working closely with anybody in the community who is, interested in climate action. So if you have an idea for something that you want to try or something you want to do in your neighborhood or something you want to be connected with other people about, drop me a line. I'm always happy to hear from people anytime. And thanks again, Jude and Clark and everybody for coming in.
Thank you, Jeremy. That was really terrific. That's a lot of really useful information that we have tonight. Just before people sign off, I just want to talk about what's happening next week. And interestingly enough, it's zero emission buildings.
Oh, good.
With an architect named Greg Allen, who spent most of his life working on this. And so this will be a chance for you to find out more of the nitty gritty and ask some questions about zero emission buildings, not just houses, but also industrial buildings as well. And this will be our last seminar for the spring season and for this season as a whole. So make sure you tune in and we'll see you all next week.